Hello, everyone to Forest Focus. If you listened last week, you'll have heard a really good, interesting conversation with myself and Lewis McGugan. So I wanted to repeat that with another one of our valued podcast regulars in TNT Sports commentator and Forest fan, Darren Fletcher. Fletch, appreciate you being with us at the end of a very long season for you, which culminated in the Champions League final, which I'm sure you just got back from. How are you doing today?
Yeah, very good, mate. Thank you. All set for a rest.
Yes, no doubt. Was there a point in that Champions League final where even subconsciously, as the fifth goal went in, you thought, oh, maybe it's not so bad that Forest aren't going to play PSG next season?
Not really, but I'm kind of looking at next season through practical eyes. I thoroughly understand people who look at it through eyes that want to dream, but I think in terms of building what they want to build, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it gives them a chance, and I think I've said this before, to build properly, do it at their own pace, and eventually get to where they want to go. So while it would have been brilliant to be in the Champions League, it would have been very, very difficult looking at the teams that are in there and could have been impactful on the league. So I'm quite optimistic that next season can be another season where Forest can do well on multiple fronts and give everybody something to look forward to right the way through until the end of the season.
I remember last time you were on, I think we'd lost to Leicester or we'd beat West Ham. I think it was maybe last year. And you said, and it stuck with me, oh, don't be surprised if there's a shock result if someone slips up. And obviously, they did. And yeah. I suppose for a lot of fans, that was the frustration on the final day that we couldn't take advantage. Any thoughts on that final day and more widely, your assessment of the season in general just gone by?
I think looking bigger picture, it was a fantastic season, whichever way you look at it. I mean, to go from where they were to kind of double the points tally from the season before, to give the fans an opportunity to go to Wembley for an FA Cup semi-final, to give fans an opportunity to dream about the Champions League right the way until the end of the season, and to deliver some magnificent memories along the way in terms of some of the wins that Forest had, winning at Old Trafford, winning at Anfield, things like this. I think it was an absolutely superb season. I understand the disappointment of the final day, because you would have said a game at the City Ground, one-off, 90 minutes, win it, you're in the Champions League. Everybody would take it and be confident about it. So I understand the disappointment, but I think this is very much a process and a long-term process for the owner and for the people that are working there. So, I think they're going to be seeing this as an extremely positive 9.5 months and one that they can build on for next season.
I remember last year, we sort of did this last year and we took stock. And I think you said, if you look at this area of the team, if we can win a couple more away games, if we can defend corners, some fundamental things that will help us get, I think you said another 10 points and we got another 30 or something ridiculously. Any particular areas where you look at this team and you think, okay, these are the things we need to improve on? And I guess they get incrementally harder as you're trying to go from 7th to 6th to 5th to 4th, but anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, and I would say as well that there are a lot of people more optimistic than me at the start of the season about what they could achieve. I thought they'd be better than last season, but not this good. So even after 2 or 3 months of the season, I still thought they'd plateau at some point. So I can't claim to be right on my assessment this season. They've blown me away in terms of what they've been able to achieve. But I think now, whilst last season you could make a lot of cases for what they got to do, and I thought defending set pieces was the key thing. It cost them so many goals last season that it seemed like it stood out like a sore thumb, that if they carried on doing that, they were going to find it hard to improve. I don't think there's anything like that this season. What I would say, though, I think this is now, the emphasis now is more on the recruitment team than the manager, that now they've got to make the team better. They've got to make the depth better. They've got to get quality into certain areas of the pitch that they've maybe not got enough of now. And I think they've got to start looking at players that can take them to the next level and do it consistently. I also think the way that the season ended, and I don't want to use the term fizzled out because that wouldn't be fair, but the way it ended and they weren't as strong in the final weeks of the season, I think a lot of that was down to the fact that they couldn't rotate at key times, that they didn't have the players to do it, that a lot of players had to play a lot of minutes, and they paid the price for it at the end of the season. They couldn't go into the January window and do what other teams did around them. So, and they weren't as deep as them in the first place. So I look at this summer now as one of, can they get better players in key areas? Can the players coming off the bench be more impactful? Can there be more of them? And then can they go into next season with a really positive mindset, a game plan that suits them, round pegs in round holes, but just be able to sustain it for longer and give players a rest when they need to, move people around a little bit. I think tactically now, the players and the manager know exactly what they want to be. A lot of this is going to be reliant on certain people being as good again as they were this season. I'm thinking about the goalkeeper and the centre forward in particular. So, they've got to make sure that that's still as good as it is. There can't be a drop off there. All of a sudden, Sells can't have 5 or 6 clean sheets less and Chris Wood's got 6 or 7 goals less. Then it starts to become a problem. But I think now it's about showing everybody that they're ready to take the next step. And that's in terms of the kind of players that they recruit, and make sure that the squad in general is both better in terms of quality and significantly better in terms of depth by the time they kick off the next season. That'd be the key areas for me.
I'll ask you much more about that, the squad transfer, the squad makeup thing shortly. I just on the couple of those players there. I watched Ali McCoist, your colleague, pick a team of the season on one of the videos that we all scroll through our phones, and he popped up, and I watched his team of the season. It had 3 Forest players in, and it was Sells, Milenkovic, and Wood. I'm pretty sure. I'm sure Milenkovic can repeat this season. This is probably tough to answer. Are you anticipating any kind of drop off from Sells? And perhaps more likely Woods, just down to age, and I suppose that feeds into recruitment. But your thoughts on if they can repeat that the seasons we just witnessed?
Yeah, I think he might have had Ola Reiner in the team as well.
Oh, he might as well. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, you're correct.
I think there were 4. We did discuss it as well, so I think there might have been a bit of influence there. But I think if it was a tight one, I was able to push him down the Forest route. That has to be a concern, doesn't it? Because they've had such good seasons, and they've delivered seasons that I don't think even the most optimistic supporter would have expected them to. I mean, I don't think anybody would have been confident that Matt Sells would have shared the Golden Glove with David Raya, and I don't think anybody would have expected Chris to score the number of goals that he did. But I think it's a little bit of an unfair question to say, do you think it's going to drop off? Because that would mean I was going to be critical of 2 of Forest's best players this season, and I don't really want to be. What I think they've got to make sure is that in the goalkeeper's case, a lot of his clean sheets were down to the fact that the team as a whole defended so well, that they were a fantastic team without the ball. And I think if they can do that again, then he's got a real chance to be as consistent as he was, because I don't think there's any reason why he wouldn't perform on a personal level the way that he's performed. But I think those around him as a collective have got to be as good again. You'd like to think that Murillo will take yet another step next season, because there's no doubt that defensively he was better this season than he was last season. Positionally, learning the game, the influence of Milenkovic is huge on him. I think you will get consistency from Nikola Milenkovic. I don't think that's going to change. And I think those around them have to make sure that the team in general is as good without the ball as it was this season. Top end of the pitch, I'd like to think that by the time the season kicks off, there's more help for Chris Wood than there was this season, that he's not got to be the player that has to score 20 goals for this team to be successful. It would be nice if you could say to Chris, look, you carried us in terms of goals this season, but next season that's not going to be the case, because we're going to have an excellent backup striker and maybe a third striker, and it's not always going to have to be about you. So, and I think that then takes the pressure off him and allows him to play with a lot more freedom. So I'd like to think that they can deal with it in a different way. That, yeah, we can kind of reflect on this season, a Golden Glove, fantastic individual goal scoring season for Chris Wood. But I'd like to think that by the time the next season starts, there are more things in place that means that hasn't got to be the case for the team to be successful.
What's your thoughts on Igor Jesus as potentially the second striker, maybe the third. Like you say, we don't know what's happening. We're shopping the Brazilian market again for him, Cuiabano and Jair Cunha, all from Botafogo. I don't know if you've seen much of them or not, but any general thoughts on that transfer strategy?
Do you know, I couldn't tell you because I haven't seen them. I'm not going to sit here and try and become some South American football expert, which I'm not. But what I would say is, I mean, there's a fair track record in South American players being successful at the club. So they've obviously got this market well and truly scrutinised, and they tend to do well with the ones that they sign. So why not? I mean, you'd hope the centre back can be as successful as Murillo, wouldn't you? Because then they're going to have two Brazilian players worth an awful lot of money moving forward. The fact they need a striker, I think, is important. I think they need two. And I think they need help in the fullback areas as well. So the strategy in terms of the areas that they're looking to recruit, I think, is positive. But I've kind of got it in my mind that I feel like this is the summer where they make at least one statement signing. You know, maybe sign a player that people didn't think they could get. Someone that's of a real standard that you think, yeah, this really feels like they mean business now. I think it feels like it's time to do that. And I also think it's time to make sure they don't lose players as well. I mean, the last thing you want to see is Morgan Gibbs-White in a Manchester City shirt next season. You don't want to see Murillo playing anywhere else. I think this is the season where they've got to first and foremost keep the very good players that they've got for at least one more season to allow them to build again. And then I think they've got to put genuine quality around them. And I think, if the three lads come over from Brazil and they're all really good, that's fine. But you'd also like to think that there's at least one marquee signing that they can now make as a European club that makes people go, hang on a second, all right, phase 3, I suppose it would be, has now started. Phase 1 being promotion, phase 2 being consolidation and moving forward, and phase 3 is like, right now we are a club that needs to be mentioned along the same lines as Aston Villa, Newcastle, etc. Moving forward, we're now ready to challenge for European football and FA Cup finals and things like that every season. And I think this is the summer where they can prove to everybody that that's the case.
It's interesting with Morgan, isn't it? Because I spoke to John Percy was on here, a couple of other journalists, all thought Morgan would go. And I kind of wondered around the financial realities of PSR that he or a big player would. But then you see Danilo, who I'll ask you about, probably going to Lyon and plugging a PSR hole. So you think we should still be building around Morgan and, he's the core building block, and you think he might be in a Forest shirt next year then?
I think there are two ways to answer the question. If PSR is a problem, then there's not a great deal you can do. And Forest won't be the only club, if that is the case, facing that dilemma. Newcastle faced it last year. Newcastle are now in a situation this year where they should be able to strengthen. Aston Villa have got a problem now by not qualifying for the Champions League that they may have to sell before they can buy. So that's a big setback for them. Now, I don't know. I'm not privy to the PSR numbers. So if Forest have a PSR issue, then it's understandable. If they don't, and they elect to sell a Morgan Gibbs-White or a Murillo, I don't think that sends a very strong message to anybody that you want to be here for the foreseeable future, because you cannot get better season upon season by selling your best players if you don't have to. And I think it would be a real statement if they didn't have to sell a Morgan Gibbs-White, that they kept him. Because, this is all the messages that we get is that the club don't want this season to be a one-off. They want all the seasons to look like this. They want to make the ground bigger. They want to play in Europe regularly. They want to be a Champions League club. Well, you can't do that by selling your best players. Certainly not when you've just had the season that they've had. It doesn't feel like that timing is right to me. So unless it's a PSR thing, I really hope that they can keep this team together. Keep Morgan, keep Elliot Anderson, keep Callum Hudson-Odoi, keep Anthony Elanga, keep Murillo. You've got to keep your key players and you've got to add to them if you want to get better. It's difficult now to get better. Addition by subtraction is difficult in the Premier League, because if you sell Morgan Gibbs-White, what do you do? Who's Morgan Gibbs-White next season? So you're creating a problem. So I think it's really important that they keep what they've got, and then try and add to it. I think to subtract at this stage would be a worry. And what you don't want is to kind of feel they've got to take a step back now before they can go forward again. And if you start selling your best players, then it's difficult not to do that. Because look, the reality is they're still going to find it relatively difficult to attract players of a certain standard because they're not a Champions League club. So if you sell a Morgan Gibbs White as a Champions League team because of PSR, you can bring in a better player because you're a Champions League side to replace him. But they're not. They're a Conference League club. So that's a difficult position to replace if they do that. So I think it's a big challenge to ownership, and it's a big challenge to whoever crunches the numbers in there to make sure they don't fall foul of PSR, but they can keep this team together if possible and try and make it better.
Just before we carry on, a quick word for the Trent Navigation. England v Senegal is coming up at the City Ground next Tuesday. For this, it was a pre-match party, so you can enjoy that at the Nav if you don't have a ticket. And before that, on Saturday, the England game in Andorra is on at the Nav as well because it's televised. So yeah, enjoy the sort of international break into the summer at the Nav, and thanks for their support as ever. This is a side question away from Forest, but in Premier League in general. Do you understand and get the frustration of fans? And I saw this on Twitter a lot yesterday. United finished 15th in the league. They're sacking the tea lady and they're going out and spending 60 million quid on Cunha. Brian and Burmo's going there. And you referenced Newcastle, Villa, and I put Forest in the bracket, upwardly mobile clubs. And we're all going, hang on a minute. What about PSR? The game's, on the way to destroying itself slowly. What do you feel about that sentiment?
Yeah, I must say that I think I'm with the majority on this. I don't like it. I don't think it's fair. I don't see why a football club with solid ownership and rich owners should be penalised because of their bottom line. I understand the theory behind it, which is, you can't just allow clubs to spend all of their cash and risk going bust, chasing some unreachable dream. But I think if you're Newcastle, the richest club on the planet, for some mad reason, you can't buy any players because you're not got enough corporate boxes. I mean, it's absolutely bonkers. I mean, there's no danger of the club going bust. I mean, there has to be a better system. And the Forest owner wants to be aggressive and he wants to make the team better. So why shouldn't you be allowed to do it? I think it's appalling. I really do. And when you highlight the situation at Manchester United, don't get me started on them. I mean, I can't recall a football club being run as badly as this one for a long time. I said on the radio the other night, if you sat there and said, this is the situation they'll be in at this stage, you would have thought it was difficult to achieve, no matter how badly you managed everything, laying everybody off, can't win a match, players disgruntled, massive wages. I mean, it's the blueprint for how not to do it, isn't it? If you're Manchester United, and I'm not necessarily sure that Jim Ratcliffe's made it any better. So it looks to me as though it's getting worse. But I don't think clubs like Forest and Villa and Newcastle, who want to be elite and want to join those clubs and want to play in Champions Leagues, I don't think they should be stopped because of some regulation that nobody seems to really understand. And it only seems to affect a certain group of teams. There's teams in the Premier League that seem immune from it. So it can't be right. I don't like it. I think they should get rid of it. And I think they need a big rethink so that teams can go and join the party on a more consistent basis.
I was listening to your show on 5 Live. It was driving. I think it was either last week or the week before. And this is on a Man United thing as well. You were discussing Rashford. And I think maybe you said Barcelona, and someone else who was on the panel mentioned Forest. And I thought, well, that sounds crazy. But you referenced a big name signing, and I'm not saying Rashford, that sort of player where maybe it's a loan where you pay his wages are subsidised, or it is a big statement signing. So I'm throwing Rashford at you, but just in general, I want you to expand on your thoughts on that statement signing. Is it someone of that ilk, do you think, or maybe a bit of a younger prospect? What are you thinking?
No, I think it's a player that gives you something that you haven't got, that makes your team fundamentally better. Now, I look at that Forest team at the minute, and the thing that I think it cries out for, and I'll get to Rashford in a minute, is a real tone setter in central midfield. A player that can really be the conductor of the orchestra. Morgan's further forward. Elliott is a bit of everything. He's a really talented player, but he does everything really well. But who sits at the back of it? and has the ball and says, this is how, who's the quarterback of the midfield? And I think to take the next step, if it was me, that's the area that I'd be looking at. To really make the center of the pitch a really strong area with a really, really good player. You know, I've heard the name Douglas Luiz mentioned, who did a great job doing that for Aston Villa. He's gone to Italy, he's done well there. Do you think about that kind of player? I watched the Champions League at the weekend, and Vitinha does it as well as anybody possibly since Xavi for Paris Saint-Germain. You looked on the other side of things. Çalhanoğlu's done it all season for Inter Milan. There's one in there that sits and dictates and makes sure the game flows. Rodri does it at Manchester City. And I'm not saying you're going to go and sign Rodri, but if you can get a top-class operator in that part of the pitch, I think it makes everything better. It makes you better with the ball. It makes you better without the ball. It gives players freedom. So that, to me, would be a really strong statement if Forest could get a genuinely top European operator in that position. And I think it would do wonders for the team. Now, Rashford, I think Rashford can only go to a certain club. And that's a club that doesn't need him. Because one thing you can't be sure of is how he's going to be. This is the problem. You know that he's on 350,000 quid a week, and you know that you've got to pay 40 million-ish to get him. And you know that when he fancies it, he's as good as most players in the Premier League. You also know that when he doesn't fancy it and things aren't right, he's no use to you whatsoever. Now, I don't think a team like Forest, looking at those numbers, 40 million, 350, I don't think you can take a chance, because if he turns up and downs tools in December, your budget's gone, your wage bill's blown apart, and what can you do to get him back in the fold? I think it's far too much of a gamble. If you get him on loan on good wages as an extra, fine, as Villa did, and put the emphasis on him. But I don't think that's going to be the case for him this summer. Barcelona's fine, because Barcelona in the Champions League can pay the wages. They've got Lamine Yamal on one wing and they've got Rafinha on the other. So if Rashford never kicks a ball, they're going to be fine. But if Rashford becomes Marcus Rashford again, he's an asset to Barcelona. Do you see the point? He could go to PSG and do the same, because they've got Kvaratskhelia. They don't need him, do they? They don't need him. Forest would need him. If you're a club like Forest and you sign him, you're signing him to play. And he's got to play every week, pretty much. He's got to get 25 goals, and he's got to be a difference maker when it matters. I don't know whether a recruitment team could sit down and say categorically, I know he can do that, and I know he will do that. And if you can't say that and be convinced about it, I don't see how you can even contemplate the numbers. And also, in Forest's case, the togetherness, the team spirit, the way that Nuno has put this group together, the way they feel about each other. Could you risk disruption? To me, it just seems like something that you stay a million miles away from this summer.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it's too much for a gamble. It's the kind of transfer that could set you back multiple windows if it blows up in your face. So,
and by the way, Matt, you would say that just based on what we know, what we've seen for the last 18 months, that's more likely to happen than you get a consistent season. Which, if you think about him over the time, he's only really had one season where you've gone, wow. He's had one. The rest, there always been patches of inconsistency or injuries or questions about his attitude every season apart from one. So it's a big gamble based on one season. I would feel happier if somebody else took the risk. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to go back to midfield because that was really interesting, because when Lewis was on, we were just bouncing ideas around about how the team looks next season. And if Morgan goes, or if Morgan stays, actually, Lewis was kind of advocating for a 4-3-3 Newcastle type midfield where everyone's a bit good at everything. You were saying about a slightly different way of doing it there. And we spoke about Sangare. We always speak about Sangare. You didn't say Sangare could be that player necessarily, so I'll ask you about that. Do you see it in him or not?
I'm still very much on the outside looking in with him. He was fantastic at PSV, and when I could understand why they signed him. I could understand why they wanted him, but I don't think he's ever really got to the levels that we saw. And I look at him at the back end of the season, he's been better. It's the best we've seen him in a Forest shirt, but he still didn't quite feel good enough. That he still doesn't quite seem as mobile as you want. He still doesn't seem like he passes it quite as well as you want. Doesn't seem like he's got that presence to really dictate the game that you'd like. He just seems a fraction off it across the board, I think. But I mean, who am I? I'm only watching like everybody else. There'll be other people who look at him, and one or two Forest fans have said to me, really impressed by Sangare. Last few games, he'll be fine. So people are seeing it through different eyes. And look, I might be wrong. But even when you mention the Newcastle midfield, 3 in there, it's still Bruno Guimaraes that's the main person of the 3. You know, Joel Linson's all energy and running about, and Tonali does his thing, but Bruno's the glue. And I'm thinking about that team, the glue. I don't really want Morgan to be the glue, because I want Morgan to be able to have the freedom to go and do what he needs to do in areas where he can hurt the opposition. So I think you need one that just sets the tone. McAllister does it at Liverpool. Just think about it. They've all got them. The good teams, they've all got them. All of them. Forest are lacking that. So that to me is the position, I think, for that. And I get what Lou's saying, that the 3, but there's still Guimaraes is still the one at Newcastle. The majority of it goes through. So who's that going to be for us? I think if that's Morgan Gibbs-White in the Forest team, I think it's too much responsibility for a player who you want to be your match winner. You want him around the box. You want him to score more goals. You want him to make more goals. You don't want him taking the ball off the centre-backs deep and trying to play from there. You want somebody better than what they've got doing that, so that he can flourish higher up the pitch. Elliott's got the freedom to do what he does. So that would be the reason why I would look at that position, just to make the whole team function better. And also, based on the fact they're so good out of possession, the ability to screen the 2 centre-backs and keep it nice and solid there, and intuitively see where the danger is. Top-class players in those positions just do wonders for a team in and out of possession. So that would be my, if I was going to go and do a big one and think, right, let's go and make sure that would be it. But I think as well, in general, you know, overall, I know recruitment's like really on the tip of everybody's tongue at the minute, because we've got this transfer window, the short one, about to open, but they can get better in a lot of areas. You know, this season it was Jota coming off the bench, it was Ramon Sosa coming off the bench, people like that's got to be better. You know, really, they need another Elanga and another Hudson-Odoi, so that when you take one of those 2 off, the standard doesn't drop. You know, Taiwo Awani, attitude, fantastic. And it's so popular at the club. Fans love him, players love him. But he's not Chris Wood. So if Chris doesn't play, there's a huge step down from the starting striker to the second one. And again, if you want to be a top side and you want to get into Champions Leagues, you can't have that drop off. There's got to be at least 2. And you look at some of the sides, Matt, that have struggled in the Premier League this season. They are deeper than Forest. It kind of shows you how well that group at the City Ground did with limited resources. Because you look at the Tottenham group. I mean, if they've got 5 or 6 front 3 players, and there's not a great deal between any of them. They can rotate it and switch it, and it doesn't. And they've been one of the worst teams in the league. So Forest needs some depth, the genuine quality depth, and in competition for places is great, isn't it? You know, if you're Anthony Elanga and your backup is as good as you're going to get a little bit more out of the ones that are in there as well, because they don't want to lose their place. All of a sudden, it's a hungry group. So I think it's a fascinating summer now in terms of what they can do to make it deeper, make it better, add to the quality over the next few months or so.
The Sangare conversation is really interesting, and we've had it a lot. The thing that interests me is so many fans online love him, and then I think he's done really well. And Chelsea at home first half, I thought he was really good. but I have my doubts just that I've outlined around playing in a 2, mobility, that kind of thing. Lewis is still like, yeah, but Kelv was like, yeah, but Colin Barrett was like, yeah, but, and now you've been a yeah, but as well. It just interests me how people view these players differently. We just don't know, I guess. But yeah,
No,
go on, sorry.
What I think, though, is that that's such a key part of your team. And if you decide to say, look, we think he's good enough, we've only got a relatively small sample size of him playing like that as a Premier League player. He's had a lot of injuries. It's taken him a long time to settle. And then the back end of this season, we've seen what he could potentially be. The question then becomes, can he do that over the majority of a Premier League season and a European campaign as well? I think there are players on the market and available that you would have a lot more confidence in to be able to do that. Now, I'm not then saying, so you get rid of Sangari, you keep Sangari, and there's a role for Sangari to play, because if all of a sudden you get a player better than him and he's the backup and he wants to play and he was your club record signing when he came, you're starting to move the dial in terms of what you have. So I don't think it's a case of Sangari or that player. I think you've still got to add that player, knowing that you've got Sangari, knowing that you've got Elliott, knowing that you've got Morgan, knowing that Dominguez has had a good season, knowing that Yates is still there. You're then starting to put a group of midfield players together that you think, we've got most bases covered here now. So, and you're going to get better in the process because you're going to buy one that's better than what you've got already. I think that's the big thing now for them. They've got to get players better than what they've got. It sounds really simple, but now's the time to go from a Conference League place to at least a Europa League place next season, and hopefully a Champions League place. And from an FA Cup semi-final, it's a final. Or you maybe win a League Cup along the way. So these are the steps now. You know, you can't say, well, we'll qualify for the Conference League, so mid-table next year, get knocked out in the 4th round of the FA Cup. Got to get better. This is pressure now. The pressure's different. The pressure's changed from, can they stay up? The pressure's now changed to, how do we improve on what's been the best season for Nottingham Forest since Frank Clark was the manager? How do they get better? Because they've got to get better, and they want to get better. The owner tells us he wants to get better. So he's going to be applying the pressure on the recruitment team to make sure that the team get better. And also, this is the best summer that they've had for a long, long time in terms of who they can attract. You think about last season, that Marmoush, they wanted Marmoush. And the word was he didn't want to go because they finished 4th bottom in the Premier League. So he waited and went to Man City in January. It's not the case anymore. They can now offer Conference League football, European football. All the good elements of playing for the club remain. The fan base, the city, the ownership, the ambition, that's all there. Now it's got a more solid foundation because you're going to play in Europe as well. And you're going to be sitting down with people on the owner's yacht saying, but we want to be in the Champions League next. We want to win the Conference League. We're in that to win it. So we're at least going to be a Europa League side with a European trophy and hopefully a Champions League club as well. Domestic trophy, we're going to chase them hard. We want to win one of them. And we want to be more consistent in the Premier League. So it's a really enticing opportunity for a player, isn't it? When you think about it, way more enticing than it's been before. So to me, this is time now to really show your ambition and get your cards on the table and show everybody what you want to do.
That leads into probably the main question I was going to ask you. What looks like a good season next season? What qualifies as success when you consider we're in the Conference League? Other clubs that we've kind of been competing with, like Brighton, Brentford, Fulham, Bournemouth, don't have Europe. Are we pitching in that bracket still in the Premier League, or are you looking higher? How would you view a successful season next season?
I think I would view a successful season next season similar in terms of what they've achieved in the Premier League this season. I think it's going to be difficult to better that other than finish in position, if that doesn't sound too mad, because they've been consistent. They've won away from home. They've had some really good results. And bar a couple of results at the back end, they would have been in the Champions League. So I think their consistency in the Premier League needs to be maintained. And then I think you've got to be hell-bent on winning one of the 3 cup competitions that you're in, whether that's an FA Cup, a League Cup, or win the Conference League. But I think they've got to make sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on the league position. They've got to be consistent in the league. So I would hope that they would be certainly in that top 8 all season. When you're in the top 8, you're close enough to challenge. You get hot at the right time, you can get in. So I think they've got to be thinking about being in the group with Villa and Newcastle. That's the group they've got to target. I think they've got to look higher than your Brentfords and your Brightons. Brentford are going to sell Mbermo and Wissa. The goalie's gone. I mean, they're selling players. Bournemouth, Kirkes, Howson. You know, Forest can't be finishing lower than teams that are selling their best players if they're not doing that. So they've got to have the consistency to be above that group. And they've got to be competing with the likes of Newcastle and Villa consistently now. And then I think they should be fully focused on winning the Conference League. I can't see a reason why they wouldn't win that, looking at the teams that are in it. West Ham won it. Chelsea have won it. I mean, Chelsea won it easy. Chelsea won it with the reserves playing for the majority of the season. So I think to have a really good run in Europe and win a European trophy and have a consistent season in the Premier League, again, that is a good season. What I wouldn't want to see is them take a marked step backwards, because then I think that sends the wrong signals. And then you're starting to think Murillo would want to leave and X would want to leave because they can't see the future. If you want to keep this group together and make it better, you've now got to find the consistency to be as good again, and in certain areas better.
Just skirting back a bit, a question I probably should have asked about 20 minutes ago. What do you think about Danilo? Looks like, as we record this, looks like he's going. This will come out in the morning, tomorrow morning. So there might be further developments. But the principle of Danilo going to Lyon, what do you feel about that?
I genuinely haven't got a problem with it, because I don't see where he plays in the team. He's not better than Elliot Anderson. He's not better than Morgan Gibbs-White, and I don't think he can sit at the back of your midfield and dictate the game. So I think he's a popular player. I think he's a decent player. Don't think he's ever kind of hit the heights that we thought he would. Injury has played a part in that. But I kind of look at him and think he's a little bit of a jack of all trades. And when he first came and we spoke to people from Brazil, they were using the analogy of Fernandinho. Now, if he was closer to Fernandinho, I don't think that the conversation with Lyon would be being had at the moment. I don't think he's quite got to where he needed to get to when he came. So I'm fine with that. If part of the bigger picture is Danilo is going to leave because we're going to make that area of the pitch better.
We're trading players with Lyon again. We're trading players with Botafogo. People are going to point at this and say, "Oh, this is too much back scratching." I don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the Premier League. Is this the reality of transfer dealings these days? Clubs dealing with PSR? Do you think?
Possibly. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, as I've said on here, in an ideal world, you want them to go to a significant club in Europe or England and sign a really good player. It's difficult to get significantly better if you constantly trade players with Lyon and Botafogo. At some stage, you've got to bite the bullet and say, well, what we're actually going to do here is we're going to go and sign X from Y. I loved it in January when Aston Villa went to PSG and took Marco Asensio, went to Man United and took Marcus Rashford, went to Borussia Dortmund and took Daniel Marlin. That sent a real message, didn't it? It didn't work in the end because they didn't qualify for the Champions League, but they had a good go. And I think what fans want to see is the effort. Bring the players in, let's have a go. And I thought that sent a really strong message. I think Newcastle will send a really strong message this summer because they'll keep Isak. And that's a huge statement for them. Every team in the world wants to sign Alexander Isak. And there's quite a few that can afford him. But I think Newcastle are going to say, look, we're a Champions League club. We've won the League Cup. We've got strong ownership. We're not selling Alexander Isak. So I'd like Forest to do that with Gibbs-White for a start. But also, I think at some stage, as they did when they signed Bruno Guimaraes, ironically from Lyon, but circumstances were different then. Sandro Tonali from AC Milan. At some stage, you go and buy one. or you buy 2, or you buy 3, and that helps you get into that area in the Premier League. So the time's coming. If it's not this summer, maybe it's January. Certainly it has to be next summer. But there's got to come a point now where these kind of players are brought in, because you can't always catch lightning in a bottle, can you? Where Forest have been really good, they've had a lot of success by getting more from players than anybody expected. When Murillo arrived from Flamengo, nobody thought, or was it from wherever it was, whichever Brazilian club it was, nobody thought he was going to be this. When they signed Milenkovic from Fiorentina for 10, 13 million, whatever it was, nobody thought he was going to be this. Nobody thought Chris Wood was going to be what he was. Callum Hudson-Odoi at £2.5 million, whatever it was, becomes one of the best wide players for the first 6 months of the Premier League season. Anthony Lang, they're over-delivering all the time on their transfers. It's difficult to do all of the time. So at some point you've got to go and if you want to go and get in with the big boys, you've got to go and buy the big players.
Yeah, no, interesting. I've got one more question for Fletch, but just before we come to that, a quick word for home move estate agents, Ben Sales. Thanks for your support as ever. If you're looking to buy or sell on the housing market, check out the link in the description. They are 5-star rated on Google as ever. Best estate agent in Nottingham, it says there. So there you go. Right. I'm going to throw a big question at you because I like your take on all these things. This is a wider football question. I was in a WhatsApp group the other day and a mate who loves football was saying, I'll go and watch my team. He's a Wolves fan, but I'm losing interest in the rest of football. He referenced VAR, PSR. You've got the Club World Cup. You've got ticket prices. You've got everything. It feels maybe we're a bit insulated as Forest fans because this season's been amazing. You'll speak to lots of people in the game. Just this is a big question. What's your just take on top level football in general? Is it getting out of hand in a way? Have we lost what football is, or do you think the game's just going to grow and grow and grow? That's a huge question, I know, but I was just interested in your take on it.
No, look, I think it's a multi-level question. I mean, football in general, I think we're extremely blessed at the minute to have a team like PSG that's just won the Champions League and players like Yamal and Doué that we can sit back and marvel at for the next decade or more. And there are other players within the Barcelona team and the PSG team that everybody's going to sit back and enjoy. I think the Premier League this season, I think our domestic game, I enjoyed this season more than most because, my club had a great season, but I thought it was quite nice to see Crystal Palace win an FA Cup. I thought it was nice to see a Champions League race that involved clubs that hadn't necessarily been there before. Newcastle winning a League Cup. You never knew week on week what the results were going to be. That predictability of the Premier League has been taken away because a lot of teams can beat a lot of teams. So I think in terms of the competitive nature of the game in our country, I think it's in a really strong position. But I can't stand PSR and I can't stand VAR. I was unfortunate enough to be at Old Trafford on the last day of the season. And if the goal that Villa scored that got disallowed, if that's not what VAR was brought in for, then I don't know what its use is. I actually think that one decision on the final Sunday was probably the most important VAR decision of the whole season. And because the referee had blown his whistle, they couldn't use it. So it's not fit for purpose. None of it. When they sit in a room, what do they think about? Surely somebody's going to stick their hand up at the back of the room and say, guys, this whistle that gets blown, what is the relevance of that? Because if we still make the wrong decision, surely we've got to be able to go back and say, no, forget the whistle. This has to be a goal. Because that shapes Aston Villa's present and future. That means they don't play in the Champions League next year. It means they sell players because of PSR by not being in, based on a decision that was wrong, and the technology that we have was unable to be used because a guy had blown a whistle. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. If you sat down with someone from another planet and say, this is the biggest sport on our planet and we run it like this, the fellow would say to you, what? How? What's wrong? And look, don't get me started on ticket prices because fans are being asked to pay more than ever before and they've got to put up with all this nonsense in the process. So we don't even include them very much in the VAR process. If you're in a stadium, you have very little knowledge of what's happening because they don't tell you. You wouldn't buy a ticket for a theatre and then have to leave the performance for 5 minutes and then come back and try and work out what had just gone on. It's just crazy. So I think there's a lot right with it, and I think there's a lot wrong with it. For me, goal line technology and nothing more. But if you do that, you've got to improve the referees. I mean, I've seen a lot of refereeing this season where they're just not fit for purpose. The guy at Manchester United, Thomas Bramall, who I was talking about there, shocker, absolute shocker. Now, they've got to somehow find a way to get the training into these guys to make them better. They've got to make them improve where they are. But the VAR, the PSR, all this stuff, the ticket prices, they've got to take a look at that. They've got to start thinking about the fans more than they do in general. Just think about the fans more, because we are starting to move, I think, into dangerous territory. You talk about the Club World Cup. I think the biggest impact of that is that we're just going to shorten careers, because you can't theoretically say to the best players in the world, you now have to play a tournament every summer, because they're just going to play this Club World Cup in the year where there's no Euros or World Cup. So if you're one of England's best players, you're playing 38 Premier League games, you're potentially playing League Cup, FA Cup, Europe. You then play a Club World Cup one summer. You then go the entire process again on very short rest. And then you're going to play a World Cup the following year. Surprise, surprise, you're back into all that again. Then you've got a Club World Cup. Then you go Euros. Injuries are going to be more prevalent. Careers are going to get shorter. I think the players at some stage, the players' unions in the respective countries will have to say, look, we just can't carry on doing it. Because again, then you get the scenario where the ticket prices are ridiculously high. You're either going to get substandard matches because players are shattered, or you're not going to get to see the big stars because they're being rested. So, it might be nice for people to earn more television money or whatever it is, generate these competitions that generate revenue all over the place. But the game itself will have to suffer, because players aren't machines, and you're going to get more ACLs, you're going to get more serious injuries, you're going to get players shattered, you're going to get a drop in standards. It's very, very impactful. We spoke about this about 2 years ago, and even then, before the Club World Cup came into being as it is, the schedule I thought was too intense then. So to then add another competition for the best players to be involved in, I think it's very dangerous. So I think there's a lot good about it, but I think there's a lot where maybe greed is taking over at the behest of people, players' health and length of career standards. So I think we're getting towards the tipping point. I think what'll be interesting is, you imagine this. Let's say they play the Club World Cup this summer, and then they all pile into domestic and European seasons. What if the World Cup in Mexico, Canada, and the US next summer's a washout because the best players either aren't there because they're injured or they're knackered and can't deliver? The greatest showpiece on the planet becomes a non-entity just because of the scheduling. And I know that some people have the view, well, look, they should be happy to do it because they get paid a fortune and they're only playing football. But the game's so much quicker. The pitches dictate that you pick up more injuries with the plastic that's woven in them. It's just everything's conspiring against the players apart from the cash at the moment. They get great wages, but if you're only going to play at the top level for 5 or 6 years, I think there will come a tipping point where people just say, look, the calendar has to be altered. So yeah, VAR, PSR, fixture congestion, schedules. I've got an issue with a lot of that, I must admit.
Yeah, I mean, tipping point was the phrase I was thinking while you were talking there. I do agree. You get to the point where either you have players popping hamstrings every match, or the game slows down and is less of a spectacle. And actually, the way Forest play suits that a little bit, being more conservative. But that's one thing. And also, you charge fans so much that people who make noise can't afford it. You ruin the atmosphere in the ground. The game's worse, and in the end, the people who are milking the money end up, ruining the game and ultimately cost themselves money. But like you say, greed at the top end just bleeding players, bleeding fans, and tipping point is the phrase. So,
by the way, these aren't the clubs. In general, these are the governing bodies. And you know, listen, some of the big clubs are in cahoots with it because they're just thinking about generating cash. I also think as well that they've got to take a look at the ownership structures as well, because, and I know we've got a situation in Nottingham where multiple ownership, but you get into this stage as well where Crystal Palace might not play in Europe next year because of the ownership. Well, that's not right. The only people that miss out are the players and the fans. So, you know, the way it's, I think you've either got to say, look, we're okay with you having numerous clubs, and just get rid of that and say we trust you to play with a bit of dignity and not try and fix it, which I don't think anybody would do. Or you've got to say you can't do it, because you can't have this scenario where the Palace fans are buzzing about playing in Europe, and now there's a genuine chance that they wouldn't, because their owner, or the owner of Lyon, that's 43% of their club. If that's okay for it to happen, why is it not okay for it to play in Europe? It's bonkers. It's either right or it's not. It can't be right for this scenario, but wrong for that one. It's like Mr. Marinakis at Nottingham. If it's okay for him to own Olympiacos and Forest, then why is it not okay for him to own Olympiacos and Forest? They're playing the Champions League. It's either right or it's wrong. And this affects a lot of clubs now, because you're starting to get these football groups, and US ownership is big on this. Now, you think about the 49ers now. They're buying clubs, Rangers, Leeds. They're spreading their portfolio. Manchester City Group have got a portfolio of clubs. Forest are getting a portfolio of clubs. So they've got to look at it and say, if this is right, then it can't impact them playing in European competitions. If it's wrong, then it has to be wrong at the start, not halfway down the line. So again, everything's blurry. I think we're getting to the stage now where blurry is the norm. VAR is blurry. PSR is blurry. This is blurry. And the fans sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, I'm paying 75 quid a ticket and I've not got a clue what's happening here. I have no idea. Crystal Palace fans have probably gone all the way through the Premier League season. They get to an FA Cup, cost them an arm and a leg. And now somebody pops up and says, well, you know, the fella's got 43% in your club and he owns Lyon. You might not be able to play in Europe now. Are you having a laugh?
Yeah. It's more complicated than that, because there's a guy, another shareholder who owns a percentage of a Danish club. That means they can't play in the Conference League potentially.
Matt, it's absurd. It really is absurd. And you know what? You've got to trust people to be genuine. You know, it's I don't know. It's so frustrating, because it's such a simple game that's becoming more and more complicated every summer. You kind of look at it and say, there's another layer that we don't quite get every year. And I don't want to sound like an old timer, but this used to be such a simple game. There was none of this. You qualified for it, you played in it. You know, the referee gave a goal, it counted, or it didn't. Now there is a danger, I think, that we're going too far, that you're going to get irreparable problems that really impact the game moving forward.
That's what I think. I mean, before I spoke to you this morning, I was reading about Palace, Lyon, their ownership structure. I spent ages the other week reading a really interesting newsletter by Swiss Ramble about Forest accounts and where they stand. This is stuff that, as a kid, I would never have thought about. 10 years ago, I would never have bothered with. And now it's almost as prevalent as the action as it is on the pitch.
By the way, let me give you this scenario then. So Palace and Lyon, right, are both in the same competition, and one of them needs a result, right, to get through. Do you really think that the dressing room is going to listen to John Textor saying, listen, can you not maybe win this on Wednesday because my other team need a win on Wednesday? Do you really think that the Palace lads are going to go, oh, yeah, fine, no problem. Yeah, that's great. Of course they're not. They're going to say, are you having a laugh? For a start, they'd out him in the media and say, this fella in here trying to get us to... It's just not going to happen. These people have dignity. They're professional people. There's no way that Olympiacos and Forest would have been in cahoots in the Champions League next season. It's bonkers. It's not happening. You're talking about two entirely different clubs and nobody really knows each other. The players aren't bothered. The Forest players couldn't give a monkeys if Olympiacos wins and vice versa. They don't care.
Yeah, God, what a slightly morbid note to end on, but it's an really interesting discussion.
Matt, it's mad, and it's getting worse. And I guarantee you, if we sit in this on this date next year, and we'll have another one that we've not got now. There'll be something else next year because PSR is only a 2-year conversation, isn't it?
Yeah.
There'll be something else. They'll put something else in between now and then, and we'll sit down and go, you can add that to the list now.
Yeah. Well, we'll be talking about UEFA squad cost ratios around the Conference League, I know, at some point. and all that stuff. So, yeah. Right. We shall leave it there. That was really interesting. If you've enjoyed this, I think I really hope you have. Do us a favour, hit like, hit subscribe, become a member or sign up for Patreon, and you'll get early access to stuff like this, any pre-recorded interview, or a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify would be lovely. Fletch, obviously we'll have you on through the course of next season, but thank you very much, and enjoy your well-earned break.
Matt, I've got to say, you do a wonderful podcast. You've got a great team around you. All of your guests are brilliant. And isn't it a privilege to sit here at the end of this season, having gone through the subjects that we've gone through with Forest, having such a good season, and we can now go and relax, have a holiday, and be excited about what next season looks like, hoping that it can be better than this. Might be a European trophy back at the City Ground for the first time since 1980. Forest are going to go into the season thinking we want to qualify for the Champions League, and the fans are going to believe that. There's going to be new players at the club. I just think it's a great time to be alive if you're from the city of Nottingham, don't you?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I'm really looking for... I know... going back, I was pretty down for a day or two about the Champions League, but I am really looking forward to next season, seeing how people love the Conference League, which leads nicely into tomorrow. We're back with Ari from Thrillos 7 International Podcast. They're an Olympiacos podcast, and lots of stuff on them winning the Conference League, the relationship between the clubs, some transfer chat as well, and thoughts on David Carmo and Marco Stamenic, who are on loan there, and lots, really interesting chat with Ari. So check that out. And then later in the week, a chat about Dale Taylor, because he had a really good season at Wigan. So I'm speaking to a Wigan fan about him, just on the thought that he might be in our squad next season because of the Conference League and the rules about having 4 homegrown players. So do check that out. Fletch, thank you very much. Really enjoyed that. We shall let you go. Have a good day, everyone. If we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.